Clap it up for Katie. I probably don't even need to give her an introduction because you've seen her many occasions where I'm standing at different places, but on stage, introducing different speakers, doing it so casually and cool as she is. Katie and I met actually for my first event that I had for Strangers of Style. I was at DV's when she was the pastry chef there, and people were, liking the treats that they were getting from my event. So thank you, Katie, for that. Who knew that would make our friendship your treats? And I knew if I wanted to get more of those treats, those pastries from her, I would need to be friends with her. So that's why we're still friends today. But she's moving to Australia, so we'll work on shipping and stuff like that. Yeah. But no, Katie, she wears many hats in this community. She has been in Baltimore for 3 years now, and she pretty much just ran with it, wanting to get something done in wherever location she's in, but in Baltimore in particular. And she founded the chapter for Creative Mornings with the help of some other people, but definitely was a strong force and leader for the chapter. She, right now, has been into writing. There's a blog that's online. I should share that. It's cute. But she is a great writer. She is a great focused and driven person, and I'm excited that we have her to kind of close out the season of Creative Mornings to talk about time. So without further ado, Katie Boyts on time.
Hi, everybody. You guys make me nervous because I thought, well, we just had an event like 2 weeks ago, and it's like the holidays, and I don't know, it's freaking cold, and so nobody's gonna really come. We'll just have like a little fireside chat, and then all you guys are here, and it just really makes me really happy, and I just want to hug you, like Inspector Gadget arms. Really, I won't. I'll save you from that. But really, thank you so much. I know everybody said that. Everybody comes on stage and they say, thank you so much for coming. And it starts to sound like cliche, but really, genuinely, there is this deep gratitude that you have gotten out of bed this morning. It may be for the donuts, and that is totally fine by me. But I really appreciate it. Partly because, does my face look great? Partly because Creative Mornings has been a centerpiece, if not the centerpiece, of my Baltimore experience. And so to be able to, as Olivia said, I sort of am on transitioning out in a very big way, to the other side of the globe. And so to be able to transition away in this particular sense, to be able to speak with you this morning like this is a huge privilege. So thank you so much for allowing me that opportunity. In thinking through this particular theme, the theme of time, what I was clear that I didn't want to do was do something really, really predictable, like give you time management 101, how to get a lot of shit done in a short amount of time. Or have some sort of really cliched reflection on my time in Baltimore with photos and let the good times roll by the Cars, which by the way is the best slideshow soundtrack. You're welcome for that. But I really don't think that any of that is going to serve you or really serve us. And so what I'd really rather do today instead is talk about sort of my reflections on this concept of time through my lens as a baker, primarily as a baker, as a writer, as a Creative Mornings host, and also as a frequent mover, as in like moving geographically. But I think it's worth saying, sort of at the outset, what we're guided, like what the core aim is that we're guided by, why we're really all here, other than for the donuts, which is that we as creatives want to make better work, and we want to suffer less in the process of making it, right? And whatever like brand of suffering that is for you, like we want to be able to sort of deal with that in a better way. And in my mind, the trickle-down effect of that is that you make better work, and you suffer less in the process of making it, and you make better friends with yourselves. And when you make better friends with yourselves, you tend to make better friends with the world, so you're sort of like more open or receptive to others, to the world around you. And so in that sense, you sort of make a better world. And I know that sounds kind of cheesy, but I really think that's true. And I think that's a really important thing to sort of have as the backdrop of these conversations. So my meditation on time really began in 2012. That year, I moved cross country 3 times, and at the end of that year, I was packing for a 4th move to Baltimore. So at the beginning of the year, I was living in Portland, Oregon. I'll switch this around so it's geographically accurate for you. So I started out in Portland, Oregon, and there I was taking classes in pastry and cooking. I was starting a food blog. I was a hobby bread baker. I moved then to Santa Fe, New Mexico, where I worked as a bread baker's apprentice in a cafe making burritos. Like, I was making burritos in Santa Fe. It's like, this is, it's like sort of a surreal moment where you're like, yeah, this is okay. And then I moved to Charleston, South Carolina, where I landed a job as a professional pastry chef and then as a baker. And then in Baltimore, I was hired on to help launch Doobies and head their pastry program. And then we sort of ended up starting Creative Mornings in the process of that, which like is not something I highly recommend, like open a cafe and launch a chapter of Creative Mornings at the same time. But we somehow sort of figured it all out, which I'm really grateful that we did. But it occurred to me during that time that, I would watch the bread dough rise in every single place and watch it sort of transform. And it occurred to me that there was like no better literal reminder that time is like constantly moving forward, it's constantly in flux than dough. Right? Because you put yeast in and it like rises and rises and rises and it gets to a maximum volume, and if you don't pay attention, if you don't do something with it in this window of time, then it absolutely just collapses. And so if like you're a designer or an artist or something, if you can imagine like what your page is, if you can imagine like, you start something on it, and then like the canvas just gets bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger, like you would start to get a bit of like painting anxiety, I would imagine. But it's kind of like that, right? So either there's this window of time that you have to do something with that dough, and sometimes that window of time goes by really, really, really fast because you have a million other things to do, or sometimes it goes by really, really slow, and it really demands so much patience because you just want it to hurry up and come along. And it was a really interesting sort of thing to watch. So one of the aha moments, or like clarifying moments that I had during that time was in Charleston, and I had gotten this book by Ken Forkish, Flour, Water, Salt, Yeast, which is this really great bread baking book. And he's a baker in Portland, and if you're a bread baker, you should get this book. And I'm not being paid by Ken, although you're welcome, Ken. So every cookbook has these like introductory chapters, right? So they like, tips and techniques and like all the shit that you need. And Ken sort of approached this really differently. He sort of talked about guiding principles. And I found it really, really helpful. And one of the things that he said, he talked about temperature too, but for the sake of this conversation, we'll just talk about time. But what he said was, think of time as an ingredient in your bread. Think of time as an ingredient, which was a really different way to look at that. So in that sense, it sort of shifted my perspective, because the amount of time that bread takes to rise, the amount of time that you do that, influences all these characteristics of the end product. The flavor primarily, but also your crumb, your crust, the volume of the bread. So it's a huge player. But in this perspective, all of a sudden, it sort of shifts. Like it's no longer just this thing that I follow really blindly in the recipe. It's something that I can work with. It's something that I'm in relationship with. So if I know that I want a particular flavor, if I want a bread to be more tart, I might extend that rise, so cool it down, so time and temperature in relationship with each other in bread, but I might cool that down. Or if I want to speed things up, I need to sort of get things going, I might use more water, I might stick the dough on top of the oven, something like that. All of a sudden I'm in a relationship with this thing that's much more flexible. I'm not at war with it. I'm not tied to it. And that led me to think about, well, we do seem to exist in terms of our work, and really most aspects of our life, in this really adversarial relationship with time. Right, like we're on one end of the spectrum, either it's going by way too fast, or it's not going by fast enough. In terms of our work, I think that we've all had jobs, and if you haven't had a job like this, you're really lucky and like, good for you. But like, right, where like the clock is just like ticking by, it's excruciating. And I remember I had a job in my 20s, I had like many jobs in my 20s like this, but where, like on the computer screen, like the little clock's at the bottom because it's a PC, right? So it's like at the bottom. Not that all boring jobs are PCs, but you have the little clock at the bottom, right? And I would take these little one-by-one Post-it notes, which I swear this is what these Post-it notes were created for, which is what I would do with them. Because who the fuck uses a Post-it note like that small? Anyway, but I'm really sorry because I think my grandma's gonna watch this, and I'm like really bad at not cussing, so I'm really sorry, Grandma. She forgets it. So I would like put the little Post-it note on the clock because I could not stand watching those minutes just like tick by at this excruciating pace, reminding me with like every tick of the minute that like my life is just being wasted. Those clocks make life really dramatic, and so in that sense, time's going by way too slowly. But I think probably more accurately, where most of us are in this room is on the other end of the spectrum, where time is going by way too fast. And I do think we're in this adversarial relationship with time. We never have enough time. Oh, we're running out of time. If only I had more time. Time is slipping away from me. We're like battling the clocks. We're at like war with this thing. I think that's really true. We want it to pause. I think that is the core of it, is that we're so uncomfortable with the fundamental nature of time, which is that it's always moving forward. And we cannot hit pause as much as we want to, mostly on like the good parts, right? The parts that we like. And I noticed two recent examples of this that were just like glaring in my face. I was reading this magazine recently, and there was this really beautiful short essay on cherry blossoms, like the trees down in DC. And she was writing about how brief the blooms were, that it was like 2 weeks, and you blink and you miss it. And in the middle of this really beautiful essay, she has this sentence that just kind of punched me. It was like, she said, "Time is the enemy." I thought, man, this is such a lovely piece of writing, but she's so wrong. Like, time in that context is the reason we love them so much. Pleasure is defined by the brevity. Or even just yesterday, I actually found this, I was like, oh, huzzah, it's so fateful. This tweet, it's like end of year, so everybody's putting the like best of list, end of year list. And this woman wrote, she said, end of year lists are a great reminder that time is unstoppable and we're all hurtling towards death. Not to get all morbid, but I think she's right. Like that's why we're so uncomfortable, because it's this reminder that like we can't stop it, and what is at the end of the line is the end. And I think that's a really interesting point. We're not going to talk about death the rest of the time, don't worry. But I think that Ken's sort of statement on that time as an ingredient shifted things, both in the craft itself of bread baking, but also sort of in the whole creative process, I think. That we don't have to think of time as an adversary. We can think of it as a contributor, as a factor, even as a collaborator. So, what happens when we apply this idea to our lives or to our crafts? One of the first examples I think of is Creative Mornings, actually. So if you break down the time that we're actually here all together, there's 1 month or one event per month, every month. So in a year, if we say like 8:30 to 10 a.m., that's an hour and a half, so 90 minutes really that we're all together and face-to-face. That's 18 hours in 1 year. 18 hours is not a lot of time in 1 year. And we could get really frustrated with that and feel like it's this big barrier. What are we supposed to create in 18 hours in a year? But instead, we could say, what can we do with that 18 hours? I think we're doing all right, I think we're doing all right. But so it's not just how much you have, it's how you use it. And I think, this ever-ticking clock is not necessarily the thing that prevents us from making more or making better. But instead, it's a factor in the process. So we could pause and simply say, how interesting that my painting is this, or my poem is that, partly because of the amount of time I spent on it. So if I only have 20 minutes to write, are those 20 minutes my enemy, or are they a collaborator, and they're part of the reason the thing is what it is? And if that thing is beautiful, then man, that 20 minutes is amazing. And I know what you're thinking, no, Katie, if I had 40 minutes, like double that, like I could make more, And maybe, you might be right. But if your reality is you only have 20 minutes, if the reality is you only have 18 hours, then it's to our benefit that we make friends with those 20 minutes rather than battle them. And I think that we do have some seasons in our lives where we can devote a lot more time to our craft. Like I remember in Santa Fe, I had this season of time where I had a lot of time to write and to bake. And I thought, oh my God, this is such a luxury. Like, I'm gonna get so much done. I'm gonna write my whole book, I'm gonna bake all this stuff, and I'm gonna learn how to make croissants, because croissants are hard. And I couldn't get anything done. I got nothing done. I mean, I got some stuff done, but I didn't get nearly done what I thought I would be able to. It's something about having that much of time paralyzed me. And I've written more in the last 6 months with 1 to 2 hours every morning, getting up extra early and writing for 1 to 2 hours. I've gotten more done in the last 6 months than I did in those 3 months where I had so much of it. So the crux is you don't know. You don't know what that looks like, what that may look like. You may have more time and it paralyzes you. Or it's harder, it's more difficult, it's more emotionally intense maybe. Or maybe it's better, and that's awesome. But I do think, if we can accept this, if we can accept the fundamental nature of time, and if we can make it our friend and not our enemy, then I think that we can make better work, or at least we can become better friends with ourselves and become more sane. And I think that sanity sort of trickles down. The second idea that I want to put forward is a little bit of a broader idea, but this idea that time itself is a creative process. Right, so this moment of time that we're in is on a continuum. And if you drew, okay, we're going to talk about death again, I'm not going to lie to you just for a minute. But if you drew a line from birth to death, and you sort of looked about that, you can draw whatever shape you want. Like mine, I feel like looks like sort of swirls or spirals, hopefully not in a downward shape. But if you drew that line out and you looked from above and you looked at that sort of panorama of it as a creative journey, well, I think that sort of changes things. I think it sort of blows things up. And what we see is that our situation is actually quite thrilling. Because you think about all these things that you apply, like best practices for a creative process, and all of a sudden we have things like discovery, surprise, joy, frustration for sure, curiosity. Hopefully it brings a sense of openness, where the imagination begins to have space. There's so much spaciousness when we sort of look above from that. But we're very tied to these minute measurements of time, like the way that our year, month, week, day, hour, minute, moment are structured. It's very tight, it's very narrow. And I'm not saying that isn't normal or necessary to some degree. I'm not saying throw your clocks and fuck punctuality. I'm a very punctual person. And my poor bakers would be 4:03 a.m. They're supposed to be there at 4, and I'd be the bread doesn't wait. Some ways, the most annoying way would be this. Anyway, so but I think that if we choose to expand our view of time in this way, and we look at sort of the panorama of our lives, it really does shift things, and we begin to see a really different picture, and it's not so narrow. And from that view, our emotions aren't so heavy, right? Like our creative blocks aren't such a pierce to our core identity. Our failures don't seem so big. And that doesn't mean that you don't devote your time and dedication to your craft, but it means you see all these little pieces, like all the sufferings that you have, all the struggles that you're having with this particular project or piece of work. They're like a little grain of sand in this much bigger picture. And I think that's a really powerful thing. So in my own practice of trying to see this, spiral as more of a creative journey, some of the practices that I think about are, I have agency. This thing is only what I make it. And I can choose, I can't choose certain events that come into my life, but I can certainly choose my reaction to that. That requires intense patience, which I've learned so much about from bread baking. It requires intense patience, and things may not come to me exactly when I want. But if I wait those 10 minutes, for the bread to rise, it's a completely different picture. It's completely different bread. Intense focus, that it's okay to take risks, and that I may make choices, we may make choices that are not formulaic, or they may even cause a few eyebrows to raise. That we have an attitude of yes, and that's not necessarily without judiciousness. I think part of being an adult is learning the art of saying no, but that means that you have an attitude of yes, that you're that my first instinct should be, or hopefully is, or I want it to be, I practice at it being, yes. How can I incorporate this into my life? And then you start to ask questions, and maybe it's no, but hopefully it's yes. And I think that if we can do any of that, then things begin to shift. Because I do think the panorama, sort of the big, informs the minute, it informs the day-to-day, it informs the daily practice of your work, and vice versa. So it's really, I think it would be, very beneficial to sort of look up from where we are and sort of see this life and how actually quite thrilling it is. I want to leave you with this, that I think time is our greatest gift. Time is your greatest gift. And I think a lot of artists don't realize, or creatives don't realize, how much power they have. Your time is the reason you have that power. It is what makes you, it is what makes us powerful. Because artists have the power to shift conversations. They have the power to spark conversations. If you think about the aesthetics of a room, those aesthetics shift the conversation, whether that's on a subconscious or conscious level. I think that's really true. And conversations inform culture. Conversations shift culture. And culture shifts the world. I don't think culture is this really static thing. I don't think it's a fixed thing. And I don't think it's something that just sort of happens to us. I think it's something that, we create, or we help create, or we inform, and that we then take with us. One of the things that I think about in terms of moving so much is that I take a piece of the culture with me, hopefully not in a grassy way, but it's one of the thrilling things about being here is that I love so much about this culture, and that I get to take part of that with me. And that the next place I go to, I carry all of your work, I carry all of the things that you created with me in some sense, and that makes me better and more ready for the next project. So in that sense, no pressure, but I think that how you spend your time, as it's your greatest gift, is immensely important to the world. And if we can sort of become better friends with ourselves as we strive to make better work, I do think that trickle down effect is immensely powerful. So make better work, make better friends with yourselves, make friends with time, and I think we can, as cheesy as it sounds, I think we can make a better world.